Welcome back, everyone. So today we're looking at all 27 games that goodoldgames.com put up for free, we're ranking them all and putting this series to rest. You might be wondering, how are we going to do this? These games are made in different styles, they're all from different times. And you're absolutely right. My first challenge was coming up with a way that I could rank them all, so here's how that's going to work. I ranked the games from 0 to 5 in each of the following categories. Story, how well it was written, how the writing style fits into the general experience, or, in cases where a full story wasn't needed, just the premise of the game. Visuals, this one's for graphics or art style. Since there are older games on this list, I thought it would be a little bit unfair to simply comment on how good the graphics look. However, even back in the dark ages of gaming, you could make up for the shortcomings of not having powerful graphics with a unique art style, so we're looking at those where we can. Soundtrack. Was the music good? Did it fit the mood? Was it worth having audio unmuted? Engagement, for how well the game drew me in and got me to play it. At this point, I suspect you might be thinking, but isn't all of this kinda subjective? And you're absolutely right again, which is why I introduced a final factor. The equalizer! I know I have biases, so what I'm going to do is, if I enjoyed the game, I will take up to 4 points away from the overall rank, and if I didn't, I will give it up to 4 points back. Hopefully this will go towards eliminating some of the bias. Now, I didn't want any ties on the list, and there were a few that showed up, so what I did was I then took those games and compared them in all categories side to side. I didn't touch the equalizer factor since that's dependent on my personal enjoyment, but where needed, I added or subtracted a quarter point. Alright, here we go! Jill of the Jungle. This game's jabs at the gaming scene, other games and their protagonists added to its charm, but unfortunately wasn't enough to nab anything above the last spot on this list. You're a female shape-shifting Tarzan, which in itself sounds awesome, but at the end of the day, it's just an average platformer with kind of annoying sound effects if I'm being honest. Worlds of Ultima, Savage Empire. What light through yonder window breaks? It is Ultima, and the green burns like the sun. A half-decent RPG, however, the story is much like the mess of pixels on the screen. The humor was decent, and some characters were moderately interesting, but the soundtrack was as pitiful as was the time I spent playing it. Akalabeth, World of Doom. A well-accomplished project with engaging gameplay. Without the game manual and some research, it would take you quite a while to get a hang of this game. The graphics are what the time period allowed and served their purpose adequately. It isn't bad, but didn't hold up in the final ranking. It's a shame. Postal. No story to speak of, really. A fitting soundtrack that served its purpose. If you just like shooting things, there are worse games out there, and in the senseless violence department, it was revolutionary for its time. It is the shooting video game equivalent of a stress ball. Lords of Midnight and Doomdark's Revenge. What can I say about this Lord of the Rings ripoff that hasn't been said about many a Dungeons & Dragons beginner DM plot? Not much, as it turns out. I actually think the story is engaging enough, but the art style left something to be desired of, and my engagement was pretty null. Hence, here lies Lords of Midnight. Lure of the Temptress. Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, ma'am. Excuse me, sir. Despite its flaws, this game did have revolutionary mechanics, good jokes, and was overall entertaining. The soundtrack was nothing special, and in the end it turned out the game was just that. Nothing special. Hello Neighbor, the alpha release. The premise of the game was interesting, the cartoony look was well executed, and the effects lent themselves perfectly to the eerie atmosphere. The soundtrack was kind of grating after a while, and much of the fun I had to make myself. Entertaining, creepy, decent. Shadow Warrior. A taste of Lo Wang. The jokes write themselves. They clearly knew this and made full use of it. The game is reminiscent of a time when Asian martial arts movies were gaining popularity and over-the-top stereotypical dubbing was all the rage. Average storyline, the graphics kinda gave me a headache, but it was entertaining, and so here it sits. Legend of Keepers Prologue. Running a dungeon like a boss. Literally. You're put in charge of safeguarding the dungeon's treasures against those pesky heroes. The concept is interesting and was well accomplished. The retro art style fits the game well, and the gameplay mechanics require you to be strategic and introduce a nice measure of randomness into the events. The humor was well done, and it made for an entertaining time. Ultima Worlds of Adventure 2 Martian Dreams. A surprisingly good adventure-style RPG. The story was quirky but not overly silly or hard to follow. The mechanics were more fleshed out, and overall I'd say this game surpassed its predecessors. Tyrion 2000. Do you like space? Do you like guns? If you haven't caught on already, we're talking about a space shooter. I don't think the humor was great and the storyline didn't appeal to me much, but the visual style was nice and the soundtrack was quite decent. It definitely worked to kill off a few hours. Teen Agent. The title says it all. The story is quirky and humorous, the visual style is reminiscent of LucasArts games, it was engaging, and the soundtrack had a few funky tunes that were definitely worth listening to. Overall, it made for a very enjoyable time. Menace. It's a shooting platformer. You're a Jean-Claude Schwarzenegger type, and your job is to shoot every filthy mutant you see before they completely take over. The gameplay's challenging, the visuals are decent to look at, the soundtrack had some cool tunes, but overall was nothing flashy. It was entertaining and definitely worth playing. Alder's Blood. A decent story, but could have been executed better in my opinion. The interesting and unique visuals, coupled with an eerie and unsettling soundtrack, did set the mood perfectly. The gameplay was engaging, and I'd definitely like to see more of it. XCOM, but with stealth, sums up this game pretty well. Kane. I personally loved this one. The story was great and immediately immersive, the style and graphics were very well executed. I had to give it a 0 for soundtrack, cause it didn't have one, but even taking both that shot and another one from the equalizer factor, Kane still managed to find itself over halfway up this list, and I'm very glad. Gwent, the Witcher card game. It's a trading card game. I gave it the lowest score on story because how would a trading card game even have an overarching storyline? It was nice to see some expanding upon the Witcher lore, but to non-fans I think the appeal would be minimal. It gets top marks for the visuals, the soundtrack, and even the engagement, since after I made the video I kept going back to play some more. Just like Kane, it took 2 severe hits, yet still managed to come out of it in a very respectable position on this list. Moving on up to our top 10, we've got Overload. You're in space, and you need to shoot things. The game was interesting, despite its noticeable lack of plot, the graphics were flashy, and the soundtrack complemented the experience quite nicely. It does not pull punches in regards to difficulty, and did get tricky at times, but it is overall a well-accomplished concept. Beneath the Steel Sky. This game uses a comic book type art style that complements the main LucasArtsy point-and-click scenes quite well. The story was very captivating, and I liked the humorous characters we got to meet. The soundtrack was okay, and the game did overall a good job drawing me in. Flight of the Amazon Queen. There was no shortage of giggles with this game. The quirky characters and cheesy humor in this classic point-and-click made for a very pleasant experience. The plot was tongue-in-cheek yet captivating. The game also presented us with artful cards that added to the conversation sections quite nicely. Ultima 4 Quest of the Avatar. I had no idea this game would find itself so high on the list. I was forced to give it a high mark for the story, since at the time it came out, it was a deeply innovative concept that was as well executed as it could be. The same goes for the visual style. The soundtrack was well made and fit perfectly. It was entertaining, though confusing at first. Star Gunner. The plot is what it is, nothing too special to see here. The graphics and style worked great for this title. The gameplay and mechanics were simple, but to beat this game requires persistence and getting to know the level layouts like many retro games. Combined with the amazing soundtrack, those features made this game one of my favorites and secured it a very high spot on this list. If you have any doubts, just go listen to the main title song. You could hold a rave to that thing. Sang-Froid Tales of Werewolves. An interesting story combined with a unique art style and set to Canadian folk songs won this game the 5th spot on the list. It is very well executed from the title font to the gameplay and is absolutely worth playing. Grab your mittens cause you don't want to get frostbitten while fighting those werewolves. Sunrider Mask of Arcadius. It's a game where you're the only guy in the universe and everyone you meet is a woman. Time to Captain Kirk our way through the universe, baby! The anime-style graphics were very well made, the gameplay was engaging, and the soundtrack was epic. Made by weebs, for weebs, and fell just short of the top 3. As we move on to our top 3 picks, let me just take this chance to remind you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video if you liked it. Let's go! Treasure Adventure Game. This game works like a side-scrolling Zelda starring young Indiana Jones with some extra mechanics added in. The art style was retro but unique, the soundtrack was very fitting and well made, and it made for very entertaining gameplay sessions. The humor was quirky and interesting, and it contained some very nice references. Achillon Book 1. I was surprised this game made it to the number 2 spot, but I would say it is very well deserved. The scenery was beautifully designed, with an equally beautiful soundtrack to go along with it. The whole amnesia plot might be a little cliché, but it definitely worked towards engagement. I seriously can't stress how well made this game was, and if you're a fan of RPGs, you definitely won't regret giving it a try. And finally, we get to our number 1 spot. Builders of Egypt. You are taken back to ancient times where you must build up the historical thriving civilization of Egypt. From food and household wares to temples, armies, and grand cultural monuments. The concept of building up a civilization is so enthralling, you have tons of games available to replicate it to your enjoyment. The one on this list takes the first spot. Did you agree with the results of my ranking system? What changes would you make in this list? Be sure to let me know in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gaming related content. I will catch you next time.